Went out. All right, people. We are having a little difficulty. Our live has our live went out. I don't know what happened, guys, but the live went out. We were having a conversation here, and it's a very important conversation. So I really want you guys to be able to share this information, and we have some good information that we're sharing here with you. But I tell you what, the internet works until it doesn't. So for anyone who is now chiming in, I want to let you know that it is Wellness Wednesday. Welcome to Wellness Wednesday. This is episode 51. Your mission here today is intelligence. I want you to come in here, bring your brain in here. We've got a lot to talk about. We have been having a conversation, and we've just been having some technical difficulties with our internet service here. And there's not really much I can do about it. But what we're talking about is being smart and safe. We're having a conversation about sexual health for all ages. And I've got a very special guest in here. We've been having a conversation about sexual health and about having that talk. All right. So I have Ameenah McLeod here. She is a civic entrepreneur and community educator. She does so much in the community with young people. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but May is Teen Pregnancy Prevention Month. So she's here to share a bit of information, and we want to share some information that we feel like we should be discussing with our young people, that we should be thinking about ourselves, and really keep an eye on the elderly. Statistics are showing us out here that elderlies are having a lot of issues with their sexual health. I don't know if you guys know that. What I also want us to be able to do is kind of debunk some of the myths and some of the misconceptions that young people have about their sexual health, about sex, about, STDs. This is information that they need to be armed with. They need to know what to look for. They need to know how to be safe. They need to know how to communicate. All right. And so what Ameenah and I were discussing, let's get back in here, Ameenah. You're back. It seems like we get to try it again.
Yeah, and I don't mind starting over because, I'm one of those people who is like, anything that I say, it can be repeated. A lot of times I'm sharing good information. I don't get offended about having to repeat anything.
Right. All right. Well, listen, people, we were having a very good conversation until we got kicked off. But we're going to start this whole thing over again. And here's how it goes. We were talking about some of the talking points that you can kind of start off with if you're going to be talking to your young adults and young people and having this sexual health talk, because it's very, very, very important. There's a whole lot of myths out here, a whole lot of misconceptions as it relates to sexual health, and we need to debunk them. We need to be able to hear them, listen to them, or maybe answer some questions for them, or lead them to places and information that could be useful for them. There will be programs and persons like Ameenah here who offer teenage pregnancy prevention workshops and things of that nature. But what I want to start out saying, and Ameenah and I agreed, one of the first things that's important when it relates to sex is just being able to have that open and honest communication, right?
Yes.
I know that to be true. And when you're having that conversation, the timing is going to be very important. So it's important to have that conversation. And not only as it relates to the first time that you may be engaging in a sexual activity, but anytime. It's important to have the conversation before engaging in any sexual activity. And this is so that you are able to establish clear boundaries and expectations for both partners. Be clear with whoever your young person is to let them know that they need to be having that conversation first. If they're not able to have the conversation, then it doesn't seem like they're going to be ready to have the act. What are some of the ways or some of the things that you are hearing, Ameenah, from young people as it relates to the very first thing that they should have when it comes to engaging in sexual activities, the conversation.
In terms of conversation, so a lot of young people, when I do workshops and I'm asking them, have you ever had the conversation with your parents first? Because one of the reasons why it's important for us to have conversation with our parents or family members or some trusted adult, that can kind of give us guidance on these things, is when you're younger, you don't have the decision making skills to know what all you should be thinking about before you jump up and get engaged in the act. And so a lot of people tend to think, okay, they're of age, or boys will be boys, girls will be girls, kids gonna be kids. But no, parents, we have to step up and have these conversations with them. When I talk with the teens and I ask them, have they had the conversation with their parents, a lot of them are kind of like, no. And what's happening is a lot of parents are just kind of not talking with their youth about it because they're shy. The parents are embarrassed, they don't know what to say, and a lot of times the parents are thinking, if I don't talk to them about it, they're not doing it. A lot of one big common misconception is the idea that if I talk to my child about sex, then I'm going to be influencing them to move towards sex, and that's not true.
Wow.
What's happening is when parents are delaying talking to their young people about sex, then they're missing opportunities to teach their children specific values or to educate them about things that can actually prolong them making that choice
Mhm.
about having sex. So you want to be able to, number one, come into a place of creating a safe space for your teen. And if you're not ready to have that conversation, that's why it's important to find resources or other people who are community educators who are willing to facilitate the conversation with you. It doesn't have to be you talking to your child exclusively. You can sit in while someone else is having the conversation so that you can have some understanding of what the sphere of influence is and give input as you see fit, because you don't
Absolutely.
have to be the expert on it. You don't have to be the expert on these things. Go and find the people who are experts. You don't have to be the
Right.
person with the best communication skills. Find other people who have those good communication skills. But we want to make sure our young people are understanding what all sex entails. And it's not just the act itself. There are a lot of
Right.
shared values that should be understood prior to having sex, or else we run the risk of there being confusion about whether this act was consensual, which undoubtedly, like you said earlier, MsTonya, will make the experience unenjoyable. And
Right.
so when we have unenjoyable experiences, there's going to be some sense of regret or remorse. And when there's regret or remorse, we can start to analyze things and feel like maybe, just maybe, I didn't give that person permission. So then we come into concepts of consent. And we
Right.
talked about this earlier on the live.
Consent consent
Yeah.
is very important. Like we say, number 1, you wanna get the time into that conversation. You wanna establish that so that you excuse me, so that you establish clear boundaries. But next, definitely consent is a key component, and especially for our sons, we don't want them to be confused. Consent goes both ways, however, we're not gonna deny that. It's just unfortunate that we see young men get caught in this consent issue. So communication is essential for ensuring that both parties are comfortable with sexual activities and that clear consent has been given. So that includes discussing what each partner is and is not comfortable with. You gotta make sure that you understand consent. And then you wanna know what those boundaries are. That's another thing. Boundaries are gonna be important. So discussing boundaries is just as important because you've got to ensure that both partners are aware and respect each other's limits. So this can include things like what type of activities are off limits to you, or what situations might be triggering to a particular partner. Make sure that you establish boundaries. You have the right to say what is comfortable for you, what you don't like, and if you don't agree, don't do it. All right?
Yeah, and I agree. And I wanted to say something about the boundaries. This is why it's important for you to talk with your young people about boundaries and consent. and helping them to have a clear understanding as to what their boundaries are. Because if your child isn't aware of what their boundaries are, your young person, your teen, even as adults, we see this happening, then how do you communicate what you're not aware of? So
Right.
we want to have these conversations with our young people so that the first time that they're talking about it isn't right before they're about to engage in the act, and then it's rushed,
Right.
or it's hushed because we'll ruin the moment. So another thing that I talk to young people about is making sure that they feel comfortable having these conversations with their partners so that they can figure out what their boundaries are, shared values, what are we actually consenting to? Because there are situations where what I define as sex could be different than another person. Somebody else
Mhm.
might say, "Oh, sex includes, oral, fellatio, or this," and another person might say, "No, that's something that's reserved for, much later on in our relationship. I'm willing to do traditional, intercourse, but
Mhm.
any of the extra stuff, that's extra." You got
Well,
some
I mean,
people. Go
you're
ahead.
right. You have, and that's why this conversation is so important, because you're not going to know those things if you're not having the conversation. So preferences come in here. So you've got to talk about those sexual preferences. You're absolutely right, because that's going to help a partner understand what you like, and also it's going to help them understand what you like. You're going to understand what they like, what they dislike. And so obviously when you have the conversation, when you're talking about your preferences, this helps the partners understand, and it leads to a more satisfying experience. You got to do that. And I feel like if we've got those things and we're kind of doing it, not necessarily that they have to be in an order, but this is the order that we've been talking about it. So the timing of having that conversation, understanding that you've got to be able to engage in the conversation before the activity. Make sure that you're having consent. Communicate your boundaries. You have to communicate those, and also that includes that in that conversation, your preferences. But this one is very important, safety. You've got to know how to communicate that. And you've got to have this conversation around safety, because this is going to ensure that both partners are taking steps to protect themselves from not just pregnancy, which is the larger conversation that people tend to have, but also from STIs and STDs. What are some of the ways and some of the conversations that you have with young people as it relates to safety in sexual health?
So one of the most important points is teaching young people to value themselves. And when we value ourselves, then we're going to respect ourselves. And when we respect ourselves, then we're going to protect ourselves. And so asking young people, if they're already practicing any forms of contraception, and a lot of times it's more so the girls that they may have, felt confident enough to go and get on birth control. I do know here in South Carolina, there are forms of contraception that you can get that it's not required for you to have an adult or a parent with you to get that. I had my feels about that because on one end I felt like, oh God, we might be allowing them to have a little bit too much autonomy, but in reality you don't want to compromise someone's health just because they don't have the relationship with their parents to come out and openly talk about those things. So young people, there are also condom access points throughout
Mhm.
different stores and barbershops and things. A lot of these places have helped to improve awareness about contraception by providing condoms in their bathrooms, and a lot of times you'll see they also have little pamphlets with them.
Mhm.
um, we had a program, a project called Condom Access Points in Dillon, throughout Dillon, and I know that they had it also here in Florence, and they has very specific little images. So there would be like, you could see a sticker of like a hat on a window, and that will let you know that that was a condom access points. Of
Okay.
course, DHEC has condoms accessible for young people and young women. If you're interested in getting on birth control here in South Carolina, like I said, you don't always have to have a guardian or an adult present to help you get on birth control, but that's one of the ways that you can start that conversation with your parent.
Mhm.
As far as with your peer or the person that you might be interested in, definitely ask them what methods of contraception do they practice. The pull out method don't work. The pull
Okay.
out method is not going to get you where you need to be. This is not Jenga, and you do not want to
No.
play games with your health. And the reason being
Absolutely.
is we're not just worried about the baby. The baby is not the worst thing that can happen. You can get STIs, and many of them are things that may not be, things that you can get rid of. So the last thing that you want to do is have one experience that affects you for the rest of your life, and then
Right.
potentially affects all the other partners that you come in contact with. So we want to make sure that young people know their status, that they know what the status of the person that they're interacting with. Talk to them about these things. What type of contraceptives are you using?
Mhm.
You can say it in a friendly way, like, hey, you strap up, what's your
Right.
favorite condom? These are conversations that need to be had before we start sending pics, and fantasizing. We want to stop, pump the brakes, and ask these important questions,
Right.
because a baby is not the worst thing that can happen.
And you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. In many cases, that baby will be the miracle compared to something else that could happen to you. So the idea of ongoing communication is just really key. So sexual communication is not a one-time conversation. We need to understand that. It's not a one-time conversation, but an ongoing dialogue. Partners should check in with each other regularly to ensure that they are still on the same page and that they discuss any changes in their preferences or their boundaries or their statuses. These are things we need to know. Communication is essential, right? For sexual relationships, for healthy, I should say, communication is essential for healthy sexual relationships. That's very, very important. And I see we've got Ty Davis in the building. He says communication. Absolutely. Good to see you in here, sir. Thank you for your comment here. Um, let's talk about some of those things like because young people have these different ideas and they're just learning, they're exploring, but there's so many myths and so many misconceptions about sexual health that I feel like need to be debunked, right? And particularly when it comes to STIs, because many STIs or STDs, they really could be asymptomatic or people could have mild symptoms. So it's important that they be tested regularly if they are sexually active. And you've gotta be able to communicate with people. You've gotta be able to ask if they have an STD, if they had an experience or anything like that with an STD, STIs. Um, how are young people navigating a conversation like that?
As we continue as adults and positive, influential adults in their lives, so parents, aunties, uncles, we have to keep helping them to understand that it's okay for them to have that conversation with their partners. Make it a part of foreplay. Before you start playing with somebody, you need to be having these conversations, finding out what their status is. We live in a time of technology, so mostly everybody has access to a smartphone. And the great thing about that is then you can actually have your papers, so to say, with you. So there's a
Right.
lot of doctors' offices offer my chart. We have to
Mhm.
make our young people feel comfortable and confident to go and get tested regularly and to take pride in their sexual health. Just as much
Right.
pride as you do in the act of having sex, you need to take pride in taking care of yourself sexually. And getting tested is one of those things. I'm when I go out and talk to young people, I'm telling them, hey, ask this person, your potential partner, do they have a my chart? If they don't, then you guys need to wait. And I will make it a prerequisite that you show me your my chart before we go any further. Now, after you
Right.
show me your my chart, we're going to continue the discussions of, okay, what is sex? How many partners have you had? What practices do you have to ensure your sexual health? And,
Mhm.
contraception, consent, all of those things go hand in hand. And
They do.
I said it earlier on the live, but when we talk about this is something that's absolutely necessary. Regular checkups, regular check-ins, right? Like you said, a person's
Yeah.
preference can change. What they did last week and it was sex might not be what they're willing to do this week. It might no longer be on the table. So you want to make
Right.
sure that you're getting consent. And I say consent is like condoms. You want to use it every partner every time, and making sure that you're checking in to get confirmation of this person's status every
I
partner
like
every
that.
time.
I like that. You've gotta get that consent. Every partner, every time. You've gotta use that condom. Every partner, every time. And we are living in these times of technology. You are able to have your medical records digitally, so it can be on your phone. And what do you call it again? My chart.
My part.
So you need to ask to see my chart. So parents, let your young people know that, and not just your young people, but parents need to know this as well. And I think often many people, and this, I'm going to get off of the age thing for a moment here, because I feel like this could go all the way around. Like, a lot of people think that only people who have lots of partners get STDs. And you need to know that anybody who is sexually active can get an STD, regardless of how many partners they've had. Okay? You need to know that. Uh, Young people often have these misconceptions of thinking, they're going to strap up and use two condoms as if that is going to be safer. That's not a thing. That's not making you safer. Let us debunk that for you, because that can be very risky. Using two condoms can actually increase the risk of tearing or breaking and making them less effective. So only use one at a time. But the important thing is that you use it correctly. You've got too many things available to you, too much information that is at the tip of your finger, not to find out how to do this correctly. Ask questions. If it's not immediately your parent, you know where the information is and how you can get it. And parents, if you're not comfortable, there are people and courses and workshops like what people in the community like Ameenah does. Send them there or direct them to a site. Let them see what an STD looks like on the body. There's pictures available online. They're looking at everything else. Let them see how that looks. That might be a very useful tool for you. I see we've got Craig Boat right here in the building. We're going to take a minute to say hi to some people. How you doing, man? He said, "Hey, beautiful people. How you doing, man?" He also says here that my chart is the bomb. Yes, it is. So take it from these people here who are letting you know. I also see we have Genesis here in the building. She says, "I feel they changed our relationships with our children when they started allowing 16-year-old parents can't stay in the room for doctor's appointments." Wow. Wow. I didn't even know that. I did not know that, because a mama like me never asked any questions. I stayed where I needed to be. Wow. And that is unfortunate. I didn't know that, guys. But these are the things that we have to debunk. We've got to have the conversation. They need to hear these things. Okay. Another myth is people think, or young people have this misconception, and they talk about this thinking that they can't get pregnant if the period is on.
Oh yeah.
That's not true. Talk about that.
Look, every time I do a workshop, I'm blown away by some of the different misconceptions. So this one is a common one. The period being on is a common one. And the reason why young people, and they think they have it down to a science, right? They're like, if your period is on, the egg done dropped, so you can't get the egg fertilized. The problem is your egg may not have fully, like, the lining of your uterus is shedding, but that
Right.
does not mean that the egg is already in the lining with it. And so what's happening is we have very unsanitary sex happening as a
Mhm.
method of thinking that you're preventing pregnancy, but what you're actually doing is you're increasing the risk of other diseases,
Right.
because now you're going without your condom and you're inserting it in the person who may or may not be clean outside of this period blood. And so you're still gonna risk getting sexually transmitted infections or diseases. In
Right.
fact, you're more likely to catch a STI because direct blood contact with the skin to skin is not one of the ways that HIV or any of the other diseases are naturally contracted. But blood is one of those bodily fluids that we know if you come in contact with blood, then you're
Right.
increasing the risk. So I advise young people to not use period sex as a way to prevent teen pregnancy. You have a lot of people who have different kinks and preferences, and I'm not into shaming anybody for their kinks or preferences, but we have to be objective when it comes to real life health practices. And
Right.
period sex is not a good health practice.
And
Another thing. Oh, go ahead.
I was before we leave this particular myth here that we're debunking, and it's not just young people. There are full-fledged grown adults who walk around and talk about this misconception,
Speak on
and
it.
that's really how it's gotten down to the young people thinking that, and just to be blunt about it. You can get pregnant, you can get STDs because period sex is unprotected sex. It is. Get that in your mind. Know that. Okay, go ahead.
So another misconception of contraception is young people, and what you're saying is absolutely true. They didn't come up with these things on their own. I've heard some of these same things when I've done workshops with adults. I've heard adults say these same things. So another common misconception is I won't get pregnant if I urinate or pee after sex. Because
Right.
in their minds they're saying I'm washing the sperm out. But we
Mhm.
have to educate our females to help them to understand that those are two different holes.
Yes.
So
Yes.
no,
And
you're
that
not
is where
washing the sperm away.
right, and that is unfortunate where that youth is just telling on itself, and also with that, they have this misconception, there's a myth that douching after sex is, preventing pregnancies or STDs, and the point of this is a point. This can actually increase your risk of infection by disturbing the natural balance of the bacteria that is naturally supposed to be in your vagina. So you cannot think that douching after sex is an effective way of preventing pregnancy or an STD. That's a myth. It's not true. All right. Uh, Also, and this is a big one, and young people deal with this one a lot. You know, I've heard a lot about young people having this discussion, but they feel like oral sex is safe and doesn't require protection. Speak on it.
We have condoms for fellatio, and the reason being is you can spread STDs, STIs through your mouth. You can actually, if a person is infected and you're having an exchange orally, because their bodily fluids are close to other precious parts of your body, particularly your eyes, you can actually end up getting diseases like gonorrhea, chlamydia, things of that nature
Yeah.
in your mouth or actually in your eye,
Mhm.
because we're talking about those opening those orifices. So you have to do as much as you can to protect yourself. And oral sex is not the, effective way. Yes, if you're having oral sex, then yeah, you're not going to be able to get pregnant because now we're no longer dealing with vaginal and uterus and all of those different things, those sexual parts. But as far as sexual transmitted infections and diseases, no, you're still at risk. And so the only
Yeah.
way to prevent this is, number one, have those conversations with your partner, make sure that you're communicating and confirming that they don't have XYZ
Mhm.
STIs, and then practice the best safe sex methods, which is a condom, some type of barrier or shield that can prevent, if this person is infected, then it can prevent them spreading bodily fluids to you that would pass on these STIs.
Right. And so let's be clear with that. We were gonna debunk this myth. We're debunking it. Oral sex, you do need to have protection. You are not protected. Oral sex is not safe sex. You can transmit STIs, including herpes, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and HPV. HPV can lead to other health issues and cervical cancer. All of this because you think that you know what you're doing and you don't. You need to have conversations. You need to be educated on it. We're not saying the act is very natural. And it obviously is very pleasurable because people are continuing to have it and will have it. But that does not mean you have to have it ignorantly. You can enjoy it, but be smart. Use protection. Use condoms because you really want to reduce the risk of transmitting anything. And there's a myth that also that you can't get an STI from someone who's never had one before. Now, here's the thing. STIs are transmitted by anyone who's sexually active, regardless of their sex history. So once you start, you don't know. Maybe it hasn't been diagnosed yet. Maybe they haven't had symptoms yet. So you still need to make sure that you are being safe. I see we got a comment here from Genesis. She said, "This is a real conversation." Absolutely. We're here to have real conversations because we're talking about everything else. So let's talk about things that are going to improve our life. We want to be better, and our sexual health is very important. It matters. Also, see, we have a comment here from Keep the Faith with Tori. She says, "I never understood how you could protect your body, but your mouth is not protected." Well, guess what? You're supposed to be protecting your mouth. You absolutely are. I see Keep the Faith with Tori also says, "People quick to put on a condom and still eating everything. Make it make sense."
LOL.
Well, it don't make sense. It don't make sense. That's not protection. There are female condoms. There are. It's unfortunate that you guys don't have this conversation and we're telling you things that you may not want to hear, but we've got to debunk these myths because we want to share this information with our young people, our young adults, and we've got to stop doing these things and putting our own selves in danger, right? And there's a myth here that people once thought, I'm not so sure where young people are with it here today, but I know that there was once a myth that only gay men got HIV. And that's not true. Anyone who is sexually active can get HIV regardless of sexual orientation. HIV is transmitted through blood, semen, and vaginal fluids. And I've heard, and I'm not so sure on this, so I might need to look this up. So I won't say this one, but definitely blood, semen, and vaginal fluids. So you need to prevent this, and you need to get tested regularly. You must. You can't. You need to be able to tell someone if you've had an STD, because what was the thing you call again? The My Chart.
Yes.
You need to be able to see their chart, and you need to be able to share your chart. Why? Because you can't tell if someone has an STD just by looking at them.
Oh,
You
no.
don't know. She looks pretty. She looks good. Oh, she looked clean. I've heard that before. That's crazy. Oh, he looks like a good guy. He's smart. That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't. Not when it comes to your sexual health. So let's debunk some of these myths. And if you really think about it, it doesn't make sense. You cannot tell if someone has an STD just by looking at them or what you think you know about them. STDs can have no visible symptoms. So it's important to get tested. And then also, let me say this real quick, and I want you to chime in here, Ameenah. And there are some STDs where there are signs of things that you might see. Anything that doesn't look normal within those regions of your private parts, then when we say it doesn't look normal, that doesn't look normal. If there's bumps, if there's any discharges or things of that nature, those are things to be aware of. And you should go online. You should look at what some of these visible signs of STDs look like. You want to know those, not just say that if you don't see it that it's not possible. Not saying that, but I think you need to be aware of what it looks like. You need to be aware that if you see a bump on someone's private part, that could mean that they have herpes. If you see a vaginal wart or somewhere on the gland a wart, you need to know what that means. Because if you ask the person and they don't know and they're ignorant and they don't know that they have an STI or an STD, you're continuing to spread. That's how these things happen. So don't think that you can look at a person, think that they look good, they look clean, they're smart. That's not the case. What have been some of the things that you have heard young people think about in terms of the visibility of symptoms as it relates to STDs?
So when it comes to young people paying attention, they're not. They really aren't. I think when I have conversations with youth, more so it's about the young men paying attention to the females' body odors. Are That's the biggest giveaway, but no one's really looking and inspecting the private parts of their partner. And the reason being is because they're just so busy just wanting to dive straight in and do their deeds and go on about their way. I would even say, I will be real, a lot of adults aren't inspecting it either. People are
Right.
so caught up in being in the moment and having this, this spontaneity and, like this hot and heavy, we're just getting
Mhm.
straight to it. Nobody's really taking the time to look. But when
And if you're in the dark.
and if you're in the dark, right? And so then there's those other factors, people not even feeling comfortable enough to have sex with the lights on. But I will say that I would, for me, when I was younger, I definitely felt confident enough to have conversations with people, ask them about the last time they got tested. And I always told my male partners, like, okay, I don't give fellatio to anybody that I don't love, but I'm going to go down just to look and see, because I want to see if there are any little bumps or cuts, because even those cuts with on a person's body or in those areas are potential opportunities to spread a disease.
Right.
But
Absolutely.
most commonly, that is not something, that's not a practice. Most young males might do a finger check where they'll do like foreplay, and they might finger a young lady and then take their fingers out to check and see if there's any type of discharge or smell or odor. And then,
Mhm.
depending on whether it's to their liking or not, that they're not. But I've heard young women oftentimes speak about being wet all the time. That's not natural.
No.
A lot of young women are very uneducated when it comes to their sexual health, and they don't even understand what discharge is supposed to be like, what's
Right.
healthy, what is not healthy. And same thing with males discharge too. um
Right.
it's not common for men to discharge, but they do discharge. Usually their discharge could be pre-cum, or actual semen itself. But if a male has discharge, then that's a sign that you need to go and get checked. And especially if it's of a specific color, we're talking about anything yellow or green, that's a sign of infection. Same
Right.
thing for our young ladies. But let's continue to have these type of conversation and normalize doing checks. Like, keep the
Right.
lights on long enough to look, because you may have given consent before you got a chance to look at what it is that you're about to hop on or jump into. Now
Right.
that I've inspected it, I see something there that might cause me to feel like, you know what, today's not the day.
Absolutely.
So those are things that we do have to keep talking to people of all ages, because
All
sometimes
ages.
visible things that can help us to say no, 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 no. But then we have to be just as careful, because there are asymptomatic people, different diseases that might not be able to be easily spotted. So
Right.
all of these things are things that you want to take into consideration.
Mhm. And I say this, if you are too shy or uncomfortable with looking with the lights on, then I don't know necessarily that you're ready for the act. You're not ready for the act if you're not comfortable enough.
You're not.
That
You're
just
not.
says so much already. I see we have a comment here from Craig Boatwright. Let me put it up here. He says, truthfully speaking, some of the men in our families and communities have let our young men down. As a young man, I was encouraged to have sex and have it often with as many women as I could. No man told me it was okay to wait. It's okay to say, no, I'm good. So, as a young man, I didn't value what I had to offer, and I became community property to a lot of women. But thank God for growth and maturity. Oh, wow. I appreciate you sharing that, brother. I appreciate you sharing that so very much. That has been a part of our culture. Shamelessly, that was a part of the culture. And one of the first thing, I know cultures where the little boy will be running outside and come up and grandpa or uncle or daddy or somebody's out at the cookout and he come up and be like, how many girlfriends you got? Okay, and the boys in elementary school, so I think we can all relate to that. So we're giving the boys one message and then we're giving the girls a totally different message. And yeah, we've got to be honest with them. It is okay. There's nothing wrong with a young man valuing himself. Okay. It's not an easy thing to do. I mean, we're not gonna lie here. It's a hard thing to restrain for anyone, for women as well, but I think it's more about a decision. And we're human. Monogamy is not natural. And if we're honest about that, which is another conversation, it's not natural, but it is a decision. And
Yes.
you make that decision based upon the value that you have for yourself. Yeah. So let's talk about some of these sexually transmitted infections that young people need to at least, if they don't remember what all of them are, or at least they need to hear the names of them, and not just young people, many people, because there's a lot of people who don't have the conversation. Let's be honest about that. But you talked about chlamydia, and that is a bacteria infection that is a really common STD among a lot of populations, and really in the Black community, you know? It's easily to treat with antibiotics, but, if it's left untreated, it can cause serious health problems. And then there's gonorrhea. Just like chlamydia, gonorrhea is also a bacteria infection that can be easily treated with antibiotics. However, again, if it's untreated, is gonna lead to other serious complications. That's why you have to be on top of your sexual health. There's syphilis. Syphilis is a bacteria infection, but this one has long-term serious health consequences, just like any of them if it's left alone. And black people, our community have been disproportionately affected by syphilis at rates for many, many years. We've had a lot of issues with this particular disease. HIV and AIDS. Black people are disproportionately high numbers in HIV and AIDS that's diagnosed in the United States. So despite all of the advances in treatments, you need to know that HIV and AIDS still remain a serious health concern. You can live. There is medication. But if you could prevent it, you know what they say, prevention is better than cure. And then we have HPV, okay? So HPV is another common STI, and it causes genital warts, and also it can cause cancer. So we wanna make sure that you know that our community, the Black community, are at higher risk of developing certain types of HPV-related cancers. That's a human papillomavirus virus. Hear those things, be aware of them, be aware of your health. Take note that STDs can affect anyone, regardless of your race or ethnicity, regardless of your economical background, your limited access to health care. All of these different stigmas is a lot going on, but if you value yourself and value your health, just have enough esteem for yourself to know that your sexual health is a part of that. So it's important to prioritize your sexual health and seek medical care if you need it. All right. Definitely. I love us being able to put this put this conversation out here for people to have. I want to read this comment here by Keep the Faith with Tori. She says, "Real talk, Cred. My son's dad told him at 6 months old to have a lot of to have a lot of women. I was like, don't tell my baby that mess." Yeah, yeah, that's that old school, old player way. That doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Um, did we leave anything out of some of those common STDs that they might hear about? Well, oh, I remember one, herpes.
Yes, herpes.
Herpes is a viral infection, and this one is one that, um, it has painful outbreaks. There's blisters and sores that can be on or around the mouth or genitals, and it is a very common STD that affects millions of people worldwide, okay? Like I said, some of those symptoms are painful blisters and sores. They could be itchy and tingly in the affected area of the breakout. There are flu-like symptoms. You could get fever, headache, body aches. You could have discomfort in urination. There could be pain, swollen lymph nodes. So you've got to pay attention to your body. You see how much responsibility comes with sex? This is why often your parents will probably not want to have you engage in sex too early. And this is why a lot of parents don't talk to their young people about sex, because I remember you saying that they feel like they're kind of giving their kids the green light to have sex. We can't think like that. We got to give them the information, because they are, just like you did, eventually going to engage in the act. And I think I would rather them be aware of what could happen. We're not trying to frighten you from having it. We want to arm you with information. And so that's important. Um, is there anything that we left out in regard to young people? Because it sounds like we covered most everything.
We did, but Mr. Boatwright raised a very, very critical point, and this is the conversation that I always end up having, and I know we will not have time to take it up today. So when we talk to young people about teen pregnancy prevention or improving our sexual health, we have to start digging deeper than just the act itself, right? We have to get to those ideas, those oftentimes antiquated ideas of gender roles, masculinity, or what is being feminine, or what is being a hoe, or what is being promiscuous, and break those things down so that we can get back to what our core values are, so that we don't
Right.
become victims of perpetuating these ideas of it's okay to be a womanizer, which is actually compromising and putting your sexual health at risk, your mental health at risk as well, your financial health at risk, because you're trying to live up to this standard that society set that made you think that it's okay for you to go out here and sleep with as many women. If you're sleeping with as many women, after a while, what are you really doing? You know what I'm saying? And then,
Right.
like you said, MsTonya, we have these double standards. We're telling our young men one thing, and then we're teaching our young women to stay pure. So now we have this virginity complex that a lot of females are trying to hold on to. And sadly, that's one of the reasons why we have a lot of STIs and stuff that's going on, because people are actually living in denial. They're sleeping
Mhm.
around. They're not getting checked, because I can just sleep with as many women. No one told me to go and practice abstinence. Nobody told me about being able to practice discipline or protect my sexual health. And then the same thing
Right.
with the girls. We have a lot of females who are so busy trying to adhere to these purity practices that they'll do everything but vaginal. And so they think that they're protecting themselves against, number one, getting a bad name and diseases, but you're still spreading a lot of different things. So those
Right.
are further conversations that come from this conversation where we dig a little bit deeper. I would love to
Yeah.
have that conversation with y'all at a later date, because I know we've run out of time, but we had such great input. We covered a lot, MsTonya. I thank you so much for having me on. And like I said, we got to keep the conversation going. If you
Right.
feel uncomfortable having these conversations, that right there is an indicator that you are not ready. that you're not ready.
Right.
If you feel like you don't want to see this person with the lights on, if you feel like it would be wrong of you to ask, can I literally inspect your privates before I jump on this, before I put my mouth on this? Like Tori said, they don't want to do traditional, but you're eating any and everything, eating the like it's groceries, you're still increasing your risk of diseases. So we have to have these conversations.
Right.
We talk about the idea of figuring out what our boundaries are and making sure that we're getting consent, using contraceptions, and getting confirmation each and every time, every partner, every time.
Absolutely.
So very powerful. So yeah, we covered a
Yeah.
lot. The conversation
Yeah.
does, it has to continue though.
The conversation can definitely continue because I expect us to have many other Wellness Wednesdays. And while we covered this, and it may sound like this was more geared towards young people, please know that this goes for all ages. There's some things in here that you may have heard that you did not know and that you need to know. And I want to, before I close out here, I want to bring this up because I don't know if you guys know this, but just in doing a little bit of research for this topic, I found out, according to data from the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, that rates of sexually transmitted infections among older adults in the United States are on the rise. Between 2014 and 2018, the rates of chlamydia infections increased by 56% among adults aged 65 and older. The rates of gonorrhea infections increased 23%, and the rates of syphilis infections increased by 16% during the same time period. 65 and older, I did not make a mistake here in reading that, and you did not hear wrong. And this is definitely an age that should know better. But
Right.
one reason for this trend is that older adults begin to feel less likely to use condoms or practice safe sex. And they believe that they're no longer at risk for STDs, but that's false. Older adults may not be aware of their risk of STDs, and they're just a little bit more hesitant to talk about healthcare providers with their sexual health concerns. So we can't just say that it's young people. These are these are elderly people, people who are way beyond the age of understanding and reason. So it's important for older adults as well as young adults to understand that you're not immune to STDs. Older people, you are not immune to STDs. So you have to continue to take steps to protect yourself. You have to continue to practice safe sex. You must continue getting tested. Talk to your healthcare providers. You know that you're having sex, so have your doctors test you. Have your healthcare providers let you know. And if you have any concerns, they're available for you to get this information. The information's out here. We got to care for ourselves. We got to care for each other. That's what I feel. All right, y'all. We've had the conversation. You got to have it. Be smart. Be safe. That's what we got to do. Be smart. Be safe. Understand that you got to have that time and the timing of your conversation. Have that conversation before you engage in sexual activities. I don't care what your age is. If you just met a person and you're dating them, yeah, you need to have that conversation because you need to know what you're consenting to. There might be some things that you're not comfortable with doing. So have that conversation. Be clear about that. Discuss your boundaries. This person must respect your boundaries. Just because they were with a previous partner who liked doing something a particular way or who liked a particular act doesn't mean that that's what you like, and vice versa. So discuss that. You got to know your preferences, understand that, be able to communicate that, and be safe. Be safe for yourself and be safe for that other person. If you like that person so much and you don't have enough like for yourself, protect them. I want to protect myself, but if you don't want to protect yourself, protect them. Communicate. Ensure that both of you guys are taking steps to prevent STDs. It's easy to do. It really is. And remember, the first thing we talked about was the timing of your communication. Well, guess what? Communication is ongoing. You've got to continue to have this conversation. I want to beat this in people's head. Young people, older people, elderly people, we got to communicate. It's not a one-time conversation. It's an ongoing dialogue. If you're having sex regularly, you need to have the conversation regular. All right? All right, y'all. That's what I wanted to bring to you. I'm happy that you were here to join us today for another edition of Wellness Wednesday on the Noontime My Time podcast. Lunchtime is just about over. You're about to get right back in there and finish up your work day, but you made it. It's hump day. I don't know. That was kind of a bad joke for today, but okay. But you guys, you made it. All right. So what we want to do right now is we want to get back into our work day. We want to take a little bit of time, take a little breath, and go back into it feeling good. Feeling good, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to breathe this thing out. Y'all make sure y'all behave out here. Share this information. Share this podcast. It might be something that you're uncomfortable talking about. So even if it's just a few minutes in this conversation that they hear, this podcast could make you have a deeper conversation, use it. That's what it's for. All right, y'all? Let's get into some breath work. Let's do some breath work. Inhale to the count of 4. Hold that a few seconds. Exhale. Hold that a few seconds. Inhale again. Hold a few seconds. Exhale. And hold that a few seconds. Inhale one more time. Hold a few seconds. And exhale. Yeah. Now, don't you feel great? I feel great. I appreciate you guys. And if nobody gave you a smile today, if nobody smiled today, you just close your eyes and give yourself a big smile and see how that feels for you. All right? Y'all be great out here. That's what we do. One love, y'all.